It's particularly cruel of Nick Finnegan to ask me to talk about Brexit before it's 9:30. I mean, this is so scary. And it's also particularly cruel because everyone is looking at the moment for answers about Brexit. And frankly, my caveat to this presentation is, if Theresa May doesn't know, I don't know. I think the only news that we're waiting on Brexit in terms of Theresa May is that Juncker is going to set a restraining order on her so that she never sets foot in Brussels again. But beyond that, all of my guesses this morning are kind of assumptions. So let's quickly go through. So the bigger picture includes some trends and insights and data, which I'll share with you, but then some assumptions that I'm going to make about Brexit and the consequences, not only for Edinburgh tourism, Scottish tourism, but also UK tourism as well. And just to give you a bit of context, by the way, I love that this is kind of tourism Tinder. So swipe right to your heart's content, if you'd like, and just go up and bump somebody without fear of prosecution. So just to give you a bit of context, Alva Association of Leading Visitor Attractions, 20 members here in Scotland, 70 across the UK, but I also got some other roles as well. And it's the other roles here which have informed some of the data and trends and insights that I'm going to be sharing with you at the moment. One of them is that the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, in contrast with his predecessor Boris Johnson, Google him if you don't know who he is, has prioritised culture and tourism as one of his 4 political priorities. Now, this is unheard of in London politics before, indeed any politics before. And I have to say, it's in sharp contrast to the news in the last 24 hours about Edinburgh City Council and their support, or lack of it, for marketing Edinburgh. I tweeted yesterday saying that this was a profoundly short-sighted, deleterious cut to marketing Edinburgh and flies in the face of logic, business sense, and also the need post-Brexit to promote Edinburgh hard for the leisure and business communities. I'll come back to that in a second. But one of my roles in London is to advise the Mayor on culture and tourism. And of course, in tourism, it's London's second largest industry. 50% of all visitors to the UK come to London. It represents about 51% of all inbound spending to the whole of the UK. No other capital city has this. Paris doesn't have it, Berlin doesn't have it, Madrid doesn't have it. It's kind of it. It's certainly not in the States. It's kind of unique to London. But one of the things that we absolutely know is that there are inconsistencies and inequalities within that tourism and cultural portfolio and offer in London. And I'll come back to that too. So Alva is principally a lobbying organisation, an advocacy organisation, so I work closely with Scottish Government and Fiona Hislop in particular, but also with ministers right the way across the devolved administrations, but also down in Whitehall and Westminster too. We represent collectively, the 72 members of Alva, about 129 million day visits in the UK. It's about 38%. That gets us in the door of number 10 in the Treasury and Home Office really, really easily. And particularly when we talk about the value of tourism, not simply in economic terms, but also social, educational, and citizenship terms as well. And I'll be touching on some of those in a second. For a UK context, tourism is the UK's 5th biggest industry, 3rd largest employer. It's worth £157 billion to the economy every year. And even in the face of austerity and recession, has been creating 1 in 3 of all new jobs, 1 in 4 of all apprenticeships. We're the economic backbone of the UK economy. We also have a resilience about our industry, which is often underappreciated. We bounce back after foot and mouth disease. We bounce back after 9/11. We bounce back after terrorism and security concerns. And actually, it may well be our resilience, our ability to adapt and change and to be flexible, that ironically is one of our political Achilles heels. Because government, both at local government and national government, just think we're going to get on with it. Just think we're going to thrive. Just think that we're always going to be there. That's not the case. You need to invest, and you need to support, and you need to have the infrastructure in which on which all of tourism depends and on which it can flow and grow sustainably. Which brings me to Van Gogh. This is one of 3 paintings that Van Gogh rendered, and it's the house in Arles. It's his bedroom in Arles in Provence. And he produced 3 of these. They're all kind of identical. One is in the Art Institute of Chicago. The other is in the Musée d'Orsay in Paris, and the other one is in the Van Gogh Museum in Amsterdam. And all 3 of those existing paintings of the house in Arles, the bedroom in Arles, were brought together for the first time at the Art Institute in Chicago a couple of years ago for a temporary exhibition. And you could live in it. Let me go back and do that again. That's the painting. That's the Airbnb room that the Art Institute of Chicago created exactly like the painting. And you could live in it for a night at £7 a night, and it was completely sold out, as you can imagine, during the whole of the duration of the temporary exhibition. Viral, social media just went bonkers, as you can imagine. They had to extend it even beyond the duration of the temporary exhibition because it was so amazing. I mean, the ability to sleep in a painting that's so fantastically, accurately rendered was just extraordinary, absolutely extraordinary. The temporary exhibition was the most popular in the Art Institute of Chicago's history. Their secondary spending in retail and catering was the highest that they've ever had. 3 paintings. 3 paintings. And the marketing campaign for this was £350. And 250 of that was on paint, to paint the room. Right at the end, I'm going to come back to remind you of this and to say that creativity doesn't necessarily have to come with a big budget attached. Actually, it's a leap of faith, or to be provocative, or to be disruptive. But it's not necessarily costly. It's more about a symptom of the way in which you feel about your organization and the ability to push envelopes and to do things in new and different ways. One of the things that we do at Alva every year is that we collate all of the visitor figures from our members and we publish them in March. And we're just doing that at the moment for the calendar year 2018. Whenever we do it, it always gets huge amounts of publicity, partly because it's a list, so journalists love it, partly because it's a sort of economic barometer of tourism, 5th biggest industry, 3rd largest employer. Mostly, however, it's like a kind of tourism top of the pops. Who's in, who's out, who's up, who's down, why. We also, because we're canny, we also produce 4 press releases, one for London, one for the UK, one for Northern Ireland, and one for Scotland. And we get the respective ministers to put in a quote when we put out the press releases. For the last 5 years, unsurprisingly, Nicola Sturgeon has given us the quote, because for the last 6 years, Scottish tourism and visits to Scottish tourism attractions have been outperforming the rest of the UK by a massive margin. Unsurprisingly, it's fairly easy to get the First Minister to provide a quote for that press release when we say that Scotland's outperforming the rest of the UK for 6 years running. But in addition to putting the list, and you can see it on the Alva website, it's kind of 1 to 250. British Museum has been number 1 for the last 10 years. In addition to putting together the list and collating those figures, and by the way, visitor numbers are just an indication, not the total indication of quality, it's an indication. One of the things that I do is then look to see if there are commonalities between those who've sustainably grown, or to see if there are commonalities between those who've seen a decrease in their visitor numbers. And sometimes this is really obvious, like the Borough, for example. So their visitor numbers will be massively down for about 2-3 years because of their closure. Or you might have a blockbuster temporary exhibition one year and go back to normal the next year, and therefore you're kind of comparing apples with oranges. So context is key. But I've gone back to look at the last 6 years and to see if there are commonalities between those visitor attractions which are sustainably growing year on year, attracting new audiences and new visitor numbers. And there are. There's common DNA to sustainably growing visitor attractions, and it's these. refresh and entice, an authentic sense of place, telling people stories, and staff and not stuff. And I'll just go through them very quickly. The first, refresh and entice, is an obvious one. If you've got the capital, if you've got the budget, the ability to refresh and entice, and that may be a paint job, or it may be a new cafe, or it may be a new gallery space, or new temporary exhibition space, or whatever. But the ability to bring something new to the table, to invite people, to entice people, give people a new reason to come, is one of the most successful ways of getting everyone to come along. And you can see it indeed in refurbishment or indeed new visitor attractions. The usual thing in visitor attractions is that you open a new gallery space and visitor numbers go through the roof. And then after about 18 months, it starts plateauing off and then falling down again. And just before it plateaus, that's the point to reinvest. So you keep on ensuring that you have fresh, enticing, interesting things to do. There are 2 visitor attractions in the whole of the UK who buck that 18-month trend. And one of them is here today. The first one is Harry Potter, Warner Brothers studio tour down in Watford. Has anyone been to it? About a third of the audience. Can I ask, what did you think of it? It's fantastic, yeah. Anybody else? Does anyone else not agree that it's fantastic? No. It's one of those, by the way, it's just about to double in size in April. I was speaking at their staff conference on Monday. 300 people in an audience. They had a IMAX cinema in the middle of Watford. So my presentation, not unlike this, was about 78 feet high, totally intimidating. And everyone in the audience had a wand. I mean, beyond weird, beyond weird. So the 2 visitor attractions who buck that trend of 18-month fall away, reinvest, go up again, a Warner Brothers studio tour, the making of Harry Potter, and National Museums of Scotland. And I know that Gordon's here today. National Museums of Scotland, because of the continual momentum to reinvest, to represent, and the new galleries which open next Thursday, are just a really, really good, emblematic indication of we never stand still, we're never complacent, we're always searching, we're always growing. Really good example. The second common DNA of success is the authentic sense of place. This is particularly pertinent here in Edinburgh, but if you go outside of capital cities and you go to sort of high street towns, they've all got a kind of H&M, and they've all got a JD Sports, and they've all got a Starbucks, and they've all got a Boots, and they've all got a Superdrug. And that homogeneous nature of cityscape, of townscape, is something that actually jars with people. They want difference, they want independence, they want differentiation. And so actually anything that reeks of differentiation and non-homogeneity is incredibly important and incredibly attractive to visitor attractions. And that can be illustrated through local food and local drink and local accents, in addition to reeking in a good sense, reeking in a sense of place. I love this photo. I love this photo with a vengeance. This is a family who wanted to be photographed against Edinburgh Castle. I mean, there are so many levels of genius going on in this photograph. I can't even begin to say. If this isn't on the front page of Edinburgh Castle's marketing plan for the next 5 years, Nick, I'm going to be really disappointed. But in a bizarre way, this kind of illustrates what I'm talking about, the authentic sense of place. I am there. Actually, if they turned round, they'd really be there. But, you know, the I am there bit, that's really important. And standing on the spot where history happens is incredibly important too, whether it's the heart of Midlothian or whether it's the alleged spot where David Rizzio, Mary Queen of Scots' Italian lover and secretary, was stabbed to death. And you can actually see the spot thanks to the Victorians, because the Victorians in their beautiful, romantic, poetic way just put red paint on the floor in case you missed it. But that standing on the spot is incredibly important. And it's particularly important at times of recession and austerity, and I would argue political instability, the kind of instability that we're going through at the moment. Because at times of instability, because the future is so uncertain and unpredictable and scary and daunting, like Brexit. The past, in contrast, is reassuring and definite and comfortable and warm and nostalgic. Now, that nostalgia can go one of either way. It can be a comfortable, good, warming nostalgia, or it can be false truths and toxic nostalgia. Everything was okay in the past. We were much happier. There were better summers. All of that kind of stuff, which fuels not only some of the conversation around Brexit, but also the conversation around Trump. So beware anyone who talks about the glories of nostalgia, because that's a double-edged sword. And here's an example. This is Shakespeare's birthplace house in Stratford-on-Avon. So the house was owned by Shakespeare's father, who was a glover, and he made the gloves in the kind of front kitchen of the house in the high street in Stratford-on-Avon. And he used to sell the gloves out of the window onto the street. Those flagstones are original. Those are the flagstones on which Shakespeare learned to walk and crawl and speak and write and learn the alphabet. And every day, including today, visitors to the Shakespeare birthplace house take off their shoes and socks to stand on the spot where Shakespeare stood, to have a physical, almost umbilical link with the past. It's incredibly powerful, motivating. They wash the flagstones every day. I mean, it's fine. But that sense of wanting to physically link with something that's greater than you, with that sort of past, is incredibly powerful, especially at moments of austerity or recession or political instability. Every time there's a recession in this country, visits to National Trust and National Trust for Scotland, English Heritage, Historic Scotland, and stately homes go up. And we do things differently as consumers, as punters, but so do the people who we buy stuff from. At the last recession, TV companies started commissioning things like Downton Abbey and Who Do You Think You Are, which is genealogical tourism, and Great British Bake Off, which is the kind of acquisition of skills lost to a generation, and Great British Sewing Bee, and Upstairs, Downstairs. We changed the way that we buy things. So supermarkets prioritize home-baked goods and pies, so it's less ostentatious, less expensive. So you're kind of hunkering down. Two exceptions to that are that sales of Prosecco and lipstick go up. The affordable little crutches that get you through life, and I'm speaking from experience. Those are the exceptions, but otherwise it's fascinating. And this isn't kind of cod psychology, this isn't kind of armchair psychology, we've got all the data to prove this, but it also happens in tourism and visitor attractions as well. That need to reacquaint yourself with the past. Where do I come from? Because I am actually not sure where I'm going to. One of the other things that we know is that people initially come to you, whether you're a restaurant, whether you're a museum, whether you're a gallery, because of what you've got, your stuff. But they'll come back because of who you employ. Now, of course, actually, it's not staff, it's staff and stuff. But actually, it's because of who you employ. It's your people who make the greatest difference to the experience. We had, those of you who are in Alva may remember that a couple of years ago, we had James McClure, who he's just moved on, the chief executive of Airbnb UK. And he came along to one of our council meetings. And he talked about how Airbnb created their business plan. And actually, they did a lot of desk research from organizations like TripAdvisor. This is fascinating. So whenever I talk about this kind of fact, staff, not stuff, HR directors love it. Because it justifies their entire existence and their budgets. But here's the killer fact. So from outside of the sector, the principal difference between a 5-star TripAdvisor review, excellent, and a 4-star TripAdvisor review, very good, is that a 5-star review is 4 times more likely to mention a staff member's name. The differentiation between very good and excellent is you. Literally you and your colleagues. Your staff and your colleagues make the difference between very good visitor experience and excellent. We value people. We value stuff, but actually we value people more and the interaction with them. So, to conclude on this bit before we go into the nether reaches of Brexit, my recipe for success, for visitor attractions in particular, but anybody really in the tourism sector, is if you want sustainable growth, new markets, new visitors, this is what you need to do. This needs to be your checklist for success. Be provocative, be disruptive, take risks. 350 quid marketing budget for the Van Gogh paintings. Stretch your brand to get people in your door who don't look like you. Foster creative partnerships with unusual suspects to develop new audiences. And this is what a good visitor experience looks like. I love this painting with a vengeance. I love this picture with a vengeance. This is a young girl just being utterly inspired by the painting of Isadora Duncan at Kelvin Grove. That's what you want every visitor experience to kind of feel like. That sort of burst of excitement and energy and enthusiasm which absolutely propels you to a new and exciting level. But very often, that's what the visitor experience looks like. I love this picture for so many reasons. One is all the girls are on one side and all the boys are on the other. I was like, I'm not talking to you. And they're probably texting each other across the back of the thing. And you just want to go up to them and say, that's Rembrandt's Night Watch. It's like, really, turn round. Except this is really misleading. Because actually what those kids are doing is using the Rijksmuseum app, which tells the story of the painting of the Night Watch. So actually, they're getting really engaged with it. They're deepening and having a richer experience with an app, not despite it or because of it. Don't take everything on first granted. I suppose the other thing, sorry, this is, I should point out, for anyone from English Heritage or indeed Historic Environment Scotland, this isn't a genuine sign, but frankly, I think we've all been there. This is also about what does the visitor experience actually feel? And some of this, I know, looks kind of a bit trite and a bit obvious, but I'm going to say it nevertheless. Welcome and say it, and thank you and goodbye right at the end. If I left here, what time is it now? If I left here, it's 10 to 10, and I got to Edinburgh Airport, by 4 o'clock this afternoon, I could be in one of 24 capital cities. The world is much smaller and more affordable. We can travel anywhere. You, in this room, have gone to places that your parents never dreamed of. And yet, of all the places in the world, and of all the places that they could spend their leisure time and their leisure hour and their leisure money, they've decided to come and spend it with you. How enormously flattering. I mean, genuinely, how enormously flattering. They could be anywhere, but they've come to you. Say thank you. Say thank you. And goodbye when they leave as well. And the goodbye bit isn't just etiquette, it's not just kind of protocol. It goes to business case. Because if you've had a good experience, if you've been to the Royal Mary King's Close, or if you've been to the Palace of Holyrood, or if you've been to National Gallery of Scotland, or if you've been to Dynamic Earth, and you've had a good experience, and it's been fine, it's been really interesting, and 54% likely, very likely, to recommend that to a friend. But if you've gone to those places, and actually you've been greeted, and so where do you come from? Who's from, where are you from today? Have you been here before? Really, if you want to come back, actually, we've got a new exhibition coming in 2 weeks' time, your propensity to recommend that place goes up by a further 20% because of people, because of interaction. Because a 5-star review is 4 times more likely to be a 5-star review if it includes a staff member's name. I went there and actually I met Alex, and she told me that the new exhibition was coming, or I went to the Botanics and I realized that they had a seasonal menu which changes throughout the year. So actually I'm definitely coming back in 4 weeks' time when I know that they've got this on the menu, all of that kind of stuff. So Brexit. So having just excited you about the possibilities, let me just sort of bring you crashing down. And I ought to do a kind of disclaimer at this point, which is ALVA as an organisation was one of the very few trade bodies to come out very clearly in favour of Remain. So that's the kind of context. I'm going to be trying to be as objective as possible here, but that's the kind of context of where we come from. I was chairing the Tourism Alliance down south in England, which is the equivalent of the Scottish Tourism Alliance here, at the time of the 2 general elections and Brexit, so that was fun. And immediately after the Brexit referendum in June 2016, we put out a consultation to all of our members saying, okay, right, well, this is the result. What are your main concerns and opportunities, do you think, if your market is largely the inbound sector? And this is what they said. So this is 2.5 years old now, but actually in terms of data, it's probably as good as anything that government has come up with. Perceptions of welcome, status of the staff, that's their ability to stay and to work. Reduced access to the UK in terms of airlines and air routes, reduction in business travel, investment, unstable exchange rates. The opportunities, this clearly happened. Weak pound, more focus on Asian markets by governments, this is UK government but also Scottish government, and more focus on tourism by government. So that was what the inbound sector said 2 years ago. And this is what the domestic sector said 2.5 years ago too. Similar kind of things, slight nuance of difference. Increased costs and lower spending, uncertainty delaying spending decisions, that absolutely happened, particularly in the hotel sector, where a number of hotels stopped their investment plans because they just didn't know what was going to be happening. Recession, fuel costs, opportunities, low pound, that certainly has happened. We've had record inbound tourism to the UK for the last 3 years, largely because we, as the UK, are 16% cheaper than we were in May 2016. Now that's meant that we're more affordable to the rest of the world. It also means the rest of the world is 16% more expensive for us Brits. So there's been a staycation too, the revenge, where us Brits have taken more holidays here in the UK because actually suddenly the rest of the world looks a bit more expensive for us too. So all of these things have been having their own kind of effect. This is really detailed data stuff, but I deliberately put it on here because I think, presumably, Nick, the presentation is going to be circulated to everybody afterwards. So do interrogate these when you get back to the ranch. So Visit Britain did some post-referendum research into the opinion of Britain from countries around the world as a result of the referendum. Britain's net reputation, slightly negative in the international total, and remains negative for Europe in the latest wave. The countries who are most concerned now about the reputation of Britain are Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, and Poland. For China, not an issue. Not an issue. For America, they've got their own worries. But those big core European markets are wobbling. Does that mean they're changing the likelihood to come to Britain in the first place? The countries who are most likely to change: Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, Poland, Spain, Sweden. China, not really. America, they've got their own worries. This is big. We've already started seeing, for many parts of the tourism sector, Brexit has already happened in terms of forward bookings. And we've already seen a decline in forward bookings to the UK from France, Germany, and the Netherlands. A slowing down of bookings to come here. Partly because they're waiting for exchange rates, partly because they're waiting to see what Brexit looks like, partly they're worried about being able to get into the country, those routes. Interest in visiting Britain? It declined in the last wave. This is about September, October of last year. Significantly lower than 2016. Brexit is already happening for the inbound tourism industry to the UK. Concern around uncertainty, again, same kind of markets. The ones who are most concerned, Germany, France, Italy, Netherlands, Poland in particular, and that's mostly about workers here, or families of workers back home in Poland. Sweden to a certain extent. While 38% of European respondents are concerned about the uncertainty around travel arrangements due to ongoing negotiations, only 7% are very concerned. That poll was taken before the madness of the last 3 months. No objective, sane person could be looking at what's going on in the House of Commons over the last 3 months and think, no, good old British upper lip, they've got it sorted, they seem to be calm, they seem to be getting it, they seem to be okay. Clearly it's an okay thing. And some of you may be thinking, listen, nobody plans their tourism visits on the basis of political stability of a nation. 2 words, Trump slump. Any guesses what the percentage decline is of us Brits going to America since Trump became president? Shout out, any ideas? Don't swipe right or what, I don't know what. Sorry? 80? 20. This is now a mad auction. What have I unleashed? Sorry, madam, what was your? 40, 18. Partly that can be explained by America's 16% more expensive because the rest of the world is more expensive. And you think, okay, well, no, that's what it is. Except when you ask those people. And it's a crude phrase. We were talking about it last night at dinner. It's a crude phrase, but most people are saying, and you might have had this chat at home around your dinner table, I'd love to, but I'm not giving that man my taxes. Ring a bell? That's political instability. That's deciding not to go to a country, not because the Hilton in Times Square is any different, not because the Grand Canyon is different, not because the Smithsonian is different, although they've only just opened because of the federal shutdown. It's because of who's president. Sorry, and welcome is a real issue too. We've always, Scotland not so much, but the UK has always suffered from having a reputation of not being a particularly welcoming country, except when people actually meet us and then they think we're lovely, particularly in a pub, and then they think we're lovely and funny and slightly drunk. But that welcome thing is a big obstacle, it's a big factor. Security concerns have had their issues in the last couple of years too. That's fading. People are getting kind of inured to it because security concerns can happen anywhere. And value for money and policy concerns. And I'm just going to quickly go to my last 2 slides, apologies for the time, just to kind of sum up what visitors are thinking. So these are the potential visitors' concerns. The ability to access the UK through ports. That whole kind of Kent becoming a car park thing. And that's a particular issue for people who drive here with motorhomes and caravans. It's a particular issue. It's the number 1 issue, concern. I'm not sure I'm going to come to Scotland. I'm not sure I'm going to come to the UK for Dutch travellers. Now, Dutch travellers, as you know, are God-given tourists because they go everywhere. They travel all around the UK and they travel all year round too. They're lovely. I really like. I can't make this explicit enough. They're just lovely. But that's their concern. That's their concern. Identity cards. The majority of European visitors to the UK don't travel on passports. They travel on their EU identity cards, which are free. And now we're asking them to come with passports. That costs €85 in France. And pet passports too. And uncertainties about aviation routes. And the historical challenge of being seen as a welcoming and inviting country. And concerns about political stability. And industry concerns, yours, ours, everyone down south as well. Number 1 is the ability to recruit and retain skilled staff. And I hate it when politicians say no skills. We know it's soft skills. And actually, you really want soft skills in our industry. Front of house and hospitality, visitor experience, all of those things. The second is a critically honest truism. We're hopeless at languages. Hopeless. We require second languages. We require people who are bilingual or multilingual. There's also concerns about the supply chain and the effects that closures in ports and travel disruption will have. And there's also concerns, and I wrote this before reading about the Marketing Edinburgh threat, less money spent on infrastructure and promotion. So in the last 2 minutes, apologies for time, in the last 2 minutes, here's stuff that we can assume. This is my guesswork. If we leave the EU, if Brexit happens, and let's just assume it does, but there's a big if there, if it happens, I reckon the pound will fall. I reckon we'll see a partial recession. I think we'll have a staycation lasting another 4 years. We'll see more and more Brits holidaying at home over the next 4 years. So think about being flexible with your marketing budgets, about where you're going to spend them, who you're going to spend them with. I think there's going to be more, one of the things that's also incredibly evident from all the visitor numbers and all the research that we did is that people outside the UK regard Scotland as more welcoming, more friendly to them, more internationally minded than England. And coming from London, that's annoying because London voted to remain too, but we're not getting any of the credit for it. But you are. Damn you. Scotland is seen, in contrast with the rest of the UK, as more internationally minded, connected to the world, open, embracing than England. But is that your get out of jail card for more people coming here? Don't rely on it. Genuinely don't rely on it. I don't think there's going to be an increase in UK or Scottish government investment in tourism or promotion or product over the next 4 years because spending priorities are going to change and actually there's just going to be less money about. You can see that with Edinburgh City Council as well. Greater pressure on local authority spending. The bed tax and TVL. Alva has traditionally not supported a bed tax unless all the money that's collected is hypothecated, it's kept and pooled and ring-fenced and only spent on tourism infrastructure, public realm, promotion and marketing. Then I'm okay with it. But conceptually, no. Why? Because the UK still is the second most taxed, in terms of tourism taxes, most taxed country in the whole of the EU, with VAT at 20% and air passenger duty. We're already fleecing tourists overnight here in the UK. They're spending huge amounts of money, and now we're saying we want you to spend more in taxation too. Unless you can hypothecate it, I'm not a fan. I'm really not a fan. And here's the last. We've also got, in terms of demographics, an increasingly elderly population. They're living longer, they're fitter for longer, but after the age of 80, their fit days, being really healthy and fine, are just the same now as they were 20 years ago. They're just medically assisted to live longer. But these people also have a different mindset as well. They may be 65 or 70 or 75, but actually they're 40 or 35 inside. They still want to be active and doing stuff. They're also the richest generation in history. They don't need your 20% off a cup of tea on a Tuesday afternoon, really. I mean, really. Actually, they'd probably find it condescending. But they do want to be invited and enticed, and they probably still want to work as well. You don't want to sign yourself off if you get to 65 or 70. Actually, many of these people are doing volunteer jobs and working as well. People want experiences too. They want to purchase memories. And here's a good example. You probably know Dippy the Diplodocus from the Natural History Museum is currently on tour. Spoiler alert, not actually a Diplodocus. It's a Victorian papier-mâché model, but don't tell the kids. When it was at the Natural History Museum in London, you used to be able to sleep underneath it. Some of you have done that or seen pictures of it. So kids used to be able to sleep underneath it. And they used to charge 60 quid per child for that. You'd get a bacon roll in the morning. It wasn't a 60 quid bacon roll, but you'd lie on a floor like that. It was marble, actually. But at Christmas, by the way, they were called dino snores. Genius. At Christmas, 140 quid per person. And everyone sold out. For years and years and years, everyone sold out. And I asked the director of the Natural History Museum, it was a bit kind of Royston Vasey, are these London prices for London people? And he's like, no. Actually, 2/3 of those people were from outside of London. They were coming from all parts of the UK. Because what they were doing, he said, was that they were purchasing lifelong memories for their children. They weren't having a transaction of an overnight stay, they were purchasing memories. Now, when you think about it in those terms, completely different mindset. You can start talking about different experiences. And climate change. I chair the Council of WWF, the World Wide Fund for Nature. We know from all the climatologists and the researchers and all the scientists with whom we work that actually the aberration of weather last year, beast from the east, and then hottest summer in 100 years, not an aberration. That's going to become increasingly the norm. What does Scottish tourism look like when you have really harsh winters and suffering summers? Might be glorious, but what does that look like? What does it feel like? How do you manage that? And then finally, the trilemma. How do you manage to balance value, the money you get in, volume targets, the incessant demand for more and more people coming through your door, often fueled by trustees, and visitor experience? And which bits of those are you prepared to compromise in pursuit of the other? Tourism is too important not to strategy and plan for, particularly in the context of reducing government support for the most important economic sector in Scotland. I said short-sighted earlier on. It's more like shooting yourself in the foot. These are going to be challenging times over the next 4 or 5 years. And the importance, therefore, of organisations like ETAG to bring you together, to share best practice, to share concerns and data, to rely on each other becomes more and more important because the future is so unpredictable and scary. Thank you very much for the invitation to come along here this morning. It's a pleasure.
Well, Bernard, that was fantastic, thank you. And we didn't want to cut him short, although he went over time, because what he was saying was
you would have been justified.
Obviously so fascinating and interesting. And from my point of view, it's obviously great to hear that Scotland's seen as more welcoming and embracing than our counterparts down south. I wrote down, never complacent, reinvest and reinvent. I think that's a great story that we could all listen to in Edinburgh. Anyway, thanks for your questions. We are running a bit short of time, so I only think we've got time for a couple. So if Kim could put up what we've got. Manchester. I'm a bit biased because I used to be chair of the Visit Manchester, the Manchester Tourist Board. Manchester in 12 years went from 10th most visited city to 3rd in the UK because, and I'm going to be really blatant about this, the local authority invested in culture and tourism. Guess what happens? The economy grows. More people come. It's an attractive place to work, to visit, to do stuff. But they've also been fostering creative partnerships with unusual suspects. So not the kind of run-of-the-mill hotel chains, but actually really embracing the history of Manchester as the birthplace of the suffragette movement, for example, and using their students in Manchester universities. Manchester has got the 4th largest university population in the whole of Europe. And using those students really imaginatively to be tourism ambassadors for Manchester, both within Manchester and the UK, but also when they get home from their overseas countries. So, Manchester. Put them back up, Kim. We'll take one more. There we go. How do you tackle the challenge of complacency in the tourism sector? By realising that when you get up in the morning and you look at your face in the mirror, that's the person who's going to have the greatest effect on your success as a business. Honestly. Because if you think it's going to be subsidies and local authority investment, you're in the wrong sector and now you're in the wrong city. Well, Bernard, thank you very much. I think we all agree that was a fascinating talk and it was a bit of insight into the issues, local, national, and we'll just see what happens on March the 29th. Thank you very much. Bernard, thank you very much. Okay, that's good. Thank you.